during the Trump administration, like sometime around 2017, 2018, the guy on the left was considered to have the most punchable face on the internet. He famously was trying to end the net neutrality rules. And since we're talking about Starlink and sort of the next generation of net neutrality, I figured we'd put the two most punchable faces next to each other, that being Ajit Pai, who was the FCC chairman responsible for trying to end net neutrality, which many people on the internet were very upset about. And then next to that, George Soros, who has been buying up Spectrum and is being accused of creating new, very non-neutral types of media. And then we've got that contrast with Starlink, who is arguably doing more for the idea of net neutrality than probably any other company. Lucas, I know you're keeping close track on this. What did you say, that Starlink was handing out devices like candy? Is that how you phrased it? I can't remember exactly what you said.
Well, I don't know, like candy, maybe like bottles of water. I don't know if you've been tracking the
As a lifeline to those drowning.
that's FEMA. If you're drowning, they're handing out bottles of water. If the forest is on fire, they're handing out cigarettes. No, the I've seen, Elon Musk has many businesses, and very interesting the buffet of businesses that he has, as well as what he's been doing with them. He has rockets that he can send into space to put satellites up there. He has a satellite communication network now called Starlink. Apart from owning the X platform as well as Tesla. So I have, in the both like the Ukraine conflict and other conflicts around the world, we see Elon cutting deals to provide internet service in the likes of Ukraine. And elsewhere, we also, and I mean, let's not forget his conflict in Brazil, and what was happening there with Bolsonaro, or Lula da Silva. But did you see the conversation he had with Pete Buttigieg regarding getting a helicopter into the flood zone in North Carolina to distribute Starlinks around there?
I didn't see that. Pete was saying he didn't want them distributing such devices.
Well, so this is where politics gets interesting, and what does FEMA actually do? FEMA, I don't know if people are aware of what FEMA does, but it's largely for doling out money to and providing money to people who've been affected in a disaster area, as well as planning for that disaster and designating someone to be the point of contact. And I think you've got two things that are actually going on in that flood zone. One, the local law enforcement, the sheriff's department, and the fire departments don't want to see people coming in and looting, and also have a limited amount of access that's going on there. But you also have flying their drones and whatnot. Anyway, there was some restrictions with regards to who could land. There were NOTAMs. I don't know if there was a TFR or a flight restriction as with regards to who could land in the area. But Elon had sent a helicopter full of I believe 1,000 Starlink devices to give out to the people that did not have internet in the area and couldn't get it in. So he literally tweeted to Pete Buttigieg, and Pete Buttigieg tweeted back, "Call me," get in my DMs, and they had a conversation. They got the NOTAM clarified, and apparently Elon was able to get some Starlink devices in the hands of the people around there. And
I'm surprised they don't do something more at a critical point like that, where the government really needs something from Elon Musk, and he's like, "Sure, all you got to do is, make me the guy that's responsible for providing internet access in rural areas, and I'd be happy to do it. So as long as you give us that designation, we're happy to help. It's like when I extract a pound of flesh from the government when you have them at that opportunity. I mean, it's all for helping people, but the government sure doesn't like to do anything for Elon Musk when he wants to be a part of the electric vehicle, conference that's happening, or if he's, being shut out of the providing broadband to rural areas. I think, didn't he say that for the amount of money that's been spent, they could have completely outfitted everybody with Starlink and had money left over?
Absolutely. And you know, he also well, you say a pound of flesh. I have to say the quality of mercy is not strained. But I say that tongue in cheek. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how benevolent. I love I love that Elon is putting Starlings out there, but I also, if I was on the side of government, I would be wary of putting control of networks, and this is concerns that we've seen from Democrats, from deep staters alike, is who controls the internet. And um, you bring up the initiative for getting internet into these rural areas. Starlink was removed from that contract, um, and that contract. I'm not sure of the details of it, but we've seen this news of what, 40 million, $42 million spent to provide internet to rural areas, and it didn't get internet into the hands of any of them. Well, why wouldn't they choose Starlink? Maybe it's because they don't have any control over the satellite network, and so they're loath to be using it. Am I going off the deep end here? Anyway,
No, I was pulling up this other article. Hold on, sorry about that.
I've,
This is another thing that seems appropriate to mention at this point. Is just, you saw this, where the Chinese are using the backdoors that were mandated by the FBI in all of the ISPs, and these backdoors have been exploited now by the Chinese. So this, I think, is entirely appropriate to mention at this point. Is that, what is the security footprint of these various networks that we're on, and does Starlink have these same kinds of mandated backdoors? That's an interesting question, I suppose.
absolutely, and I did see this. I thought a lot of um, of how we structure our communications. And these ideas of security behind them. Um, it's we have a tension here, an ironic tension between wanting communication, and yet like having notions of privacy or security that go along with it. And it's hard to walk that line. It's interesting also to think, we have this longer narrative of net neutrality. We have narratives of privacy in the United States and in the world now, um, but we want to communicate with each other. We also have this notion of net neutrality, and it's interesting that we at one time were so adamant about not regulating traffic, not looking or inspecting what the communication was, notions of free speech and more speech. And yet now we've moved into a world where if it's not the government doing it, but it's private companies, it's okay to do it. And as we contemplate the role of Bitcoin, and what were some of the ideas behind Bitcoin, it seems like that it was incredibly prescient, and also like backs up the notion of what, that nothing is free, and that we need to figure out the cost and pay for the things that we want in the world.
So I don't know if you remember when there was the big push to do HTTPS across the entire internet. Do you remember hearing about that? HTTPS everywhere, and there was like a push to just start s- setting everything up as HTTPS.
I mean, I thought most things were HTTPS these days. I don't pay that
Well,
much
there was
attention.
this there was this period of time where the HTTPS was reserved for secure communications, or what was deemed to be secure communications. It was this idea that you would only need to secure the browser if you were doing sensitive type stuff. So it was escalation of privileges at a specific point. And this was because people who had SSL certificates like usually had to pay, I don't know, a couple $100 for it, maybe $200-300, maybe 500. There was at some point these requirements. And then we started to see the rise of free HTTPS certificate issuers. And that's when there was a strong push to just use HTTPS ubiquitously across the internet for everything. And so it all kind of ties in. It's like how should we be running our networks? Secure by default, you know? How do we actually secure things? Is it the kind of software proof of work stuff that we need to do to prevent spam? How are we going to prevent deep fakes? There's a lot of what I think is going to happen in this particular decade where computer security becomes one of the most important things that can happen, and it's ubiquitously showing its face pretty much everywhere we look, from these backdoors being exploited by the Chinese to spam being pushed almost everywhere on the internet, the dead internet theory where almost everything on the internet is bots, and now we've got this problem with AI, deepfakes, and what have you. So it's to the point where computer security is becoming one of the most important things, and putting the tools in place where the average human beings can use this stuff and making it really easy and secure by default, I think is going to be the next wave. And I expect that Starlink is probably going to be at the forefront of this, since Elon Musk controls it and X, like those two things coupled together. And if he releases his phone, man, you have like a ungovernable platform, as long as you don't run afoul of Musk and his cadre, right? So it's like, as long as he doesn't shut off your access, then that's almost unfettered access to the global internet. That's pretty amazing.
It is, and it's interesting that we're coming up with alternatives. And one way that I look and think about Starlink is going back to AOL. There was a time when some people had an internet experience that was very curated, that was in sort of their own realm of you've got mail. Um, but yesterday, I live in an area that has internet that's supplied by fiber optic lines that are owned by AT&T. And not only that, but the cell phone towers here that are fed by those fiber optic lines are also owned by AT&T. And at somewhere between here and Dallas, Texas, that optic line was cut. And to do the show yesterday, I had to go borrow somebody with a Verizon phone, and create a hotspot so that I could use the Verizon phones. But this made me think of Starlink, and Starlink does not rely on these buried lines and these networks uh, that we used to fight over concepts of net neutrality, and also what part of those were utilities, what part of those were made in a paradigm of the electrical grid and the electric utility system that we had. And then you lay over one that these are operating off of satellites, but also, I mean, what happens whenever we have a bunch of devices that are communicating and transmitting that are also on the same company's networks? And I think about Tesla's charging stations and Tesla's cars, and when there's an X phone that's also bound, is it possible to create some network that is limited to traffic for the users of those devices? Um,
Well, that kind of a thing already exists in some sense. I don't know if you knew this, but your iPhone, if you've got one, operates as a mesh network. So iPhones can actually pass data device to device, and they'll do so in certain circumstances when routing traffic for, I think, things like the air tags.
Interesting. Well, and I
Are you
thought,
familiar with that? I could bring it up if that's not something you've heard
no,
before.
I wasn't familiar with that. I mean, I'm familiar with the concept, but I didn't realize that iPhones were already doing this. But I think that we're going to see, more devices begin to do this. I thought you were going to bring up um, the Verizon internet service in Miami, the HashNet there. Are you familiar with the HashNet in Miami?
No, I'm busy pulling up this other thing we're talking about. Hold on a second.
Well, go ahead.
Let's not change directions just yet. So let me tell about this. So this was first talked about when I first heard about it is when they released those air tags. And so the way that this thing can work, and if you drop something, imagine you drop one of these air tags somewhere, or you had some gym bag or something that had the air tag attached to it, and it's out there in the middle of nowhere. It's not going to be able to transmit, right? So how could Apple possibly tell you where your bag is if there's no internet access and it's not continuously being powered by a battery? Well, the way it works is it has a battery that's big enough to talk to someone who might walk past it, right? So if you drop your thing way out in the middle of the woods and no one ever walks by it, chances of the AirTag operating and someone telling you where it actually is pretty low. But if you drop something anywhere near where someone might walk by, then if someone walks by that AirTag, it's going to try and talk to any device that's near it. And so what will happen is it will talk to a phone that walks past it. Will say, "Hey, I'm here. This is the location of this AirTag," and then it will put it onto the mesh network. And so then if that phone is connected to the internet through whatever and it's got its own battery, then now that data has made its way into the world and you can try to go find your gym bag. That's what this global mesh network is, and so your device will randomly just pick up these packets and route them. So now your phone has become a mesh network router if you're using an Apple device, which is kind of an interesting thing. Like how you didn't really opt into this, I guess, unless you read the terms and conditions when they first made these changes. But yeah, this is how this is working.
Interesting. I've been given some of those AirTags, which I didn't use, or I was gifted them for Christmas, or God knows what. But I lose things from time to time, by the way. But I didn't actually dig into to how they were operating. So fascinating to think that this has its own has its own network behind it. Um, I was also thinking about the mesh net in Miami with that is using part of the Verizon network, but is um, I think it operates off of Solana, or I don't remember all the details, but we at what point also do we have devices that communicate and pass traffic with each other? Because we
That
operate.
that's yeah, that's what this mesh network is. It's a decentralized mesh network. It's device to device communication.
Well, but and it's with our phones, and maybe our phones can
Well,
can.
it's phones and a variety of sensors and devices that are allowed to participate. So like those AirTags, they're just some little sensor that exists somewhere and it has a very limited functionality. It just says, "Here's my location," and it's bound to some particular user that can know where that particular device is.
Well, and I assume what was it, airports? Do they still make airports? If they had airports, they would be passing a lot more information. Um, so at
Oh,
what?
are you talking about an Apple device? The airport was their router device, and I think it was a time machine backup too. But the AirTag is just that little sensor piece.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just saying, because we carry our phones around, but a router or some device, a fridge or a microwave, uh, that is able to that is able to pass like wireless communications back and forth. I we've talked a little bit about that being I don't know, an alternative to how traffic, to how our networks are built. And I also think, like you said the dead internet concept earlier. How much of the internet do we actually need or use? So I there was a lot of pushback to ideas behind net neutrality whenever Ajit Pai
The,
and
the biggest pushback was about routing video, I believe. That was one of the main drivers for it, was when Comcast and Netflix were starting to butt heads about the people leaving cable TV. It was a big thing about 10 years ago that cable was starting to get destroyed by streaming services. And since Comcast owned cable and they owned a bunch of the ISP stuff, they said, well, we're going to deprioritize your traffic versus ours when it's running over our network, because we're not going to try and help a competitor. And that was the idea, that everyone should have equal access to the internet. You shouldn't have to pay extra for traffic that users who are already paying for the bandwidth are getting routed. Like it's kind of a idea of whether the internet is a infrastructure that should be governed as infrastructure that's the common good, or whether it's less like railroads and that kind of a thing that should be regulated by the government. That was the whole idea behind net neutrality, is that Comcast can't throttle a competitor like Netflix when they're competing for streaming video.
and I tend to agree. I mean, I would. Well, I don't actually. I don't know. It's if they're also providing the network, like X is doing with Starlink, then why shouldn't they get to throttle other traffic?
Because that's anti-competitive, because that's monopoly, because then you should be breaking them up. That's the whole reason why we broke up, Ma Bell, because
Did we
they were.
really? Did we really break up Ma Bell though, or and did it? This goes back into this like old.
Maybe not, but it was the idea behind it. That was why they
Well,
were trying to break it up.
and this goes into the conversation that we have over and over here, which I think, like, at some point we need to have governments set against each other, because when does this narrative of trust busting and the government deciding when a company is too large start to happen? It goes back to Teddy Roosevelt. I mentioned the progressive republicanism, and this notion of progressive republicanism comes after we have a monopoly that's given out to the monetary system. And this is why I beat my head against a wall whenever I hear like us lauding the government for going out and breaking up these companies. What they should be breaking up money, which I think is where the Bitcoin is so absolutely brilliant, in that we there's this documentary that's coming out as to who is Satoshi. We don't know, but there is a possibility that it's Lynn Sassman. And I was listening to the DEF CON 11 conference about remailers that Lynn Sassman was speaking in, and they're talking about some of the issues about having enough people support a remailer to provide anonymity to the traffic going on with mail. And the problem that they come down to is that none of the ISPs want to support it, because one bad actor to go out and start sending spam that's anonymous, then the node is going to be shut down. And it's interesting that on the heels of that conversation, we see a concept like Bitcoin start to arise, and these notions of soft power proof of work that also have not just encryption and security and privacy, or, well, no privacy built into them, but security and encryption built into them, but also have a token system that we can begin to assign value and to pay for that. So to me, like, having these networks have their own evaluation, their own accounting system is very important, and is a better way to do it than have some some government Department of Justice get together and decide this company has gotten too large and we're going to break it up, but they all still operate on the same dollar.
See, I hear what you're saying about breaking up money and trying to end this type of situation, but see, you don't think there's a facility that government should be doing that kind of stuff? Just like let companies grow to whatever size they want. They can become vertical monopolies, and that you don't see any reason why we would want to break up a big company like that.
I think the problem is one monolithic system of evaluation. How, like, what kind of lie are we telling ourselves when we say the government's going to break up these companies and then split that into a bunch of other companies, but they all operate to the same ends, which is to accrue more dollars. And we see this over and over in all sorts of sectors. Why do we not why have we seen a rot of industry in the United States? It's because the only thing we produce here is dollars. And we can create all sorts of rules of groups to tell ourselves that we're going to bring industry back, um, but the real problem is that we don't have governments that are standing toe to toe with what is their industry bringing to the table. Instead, if everyone's reaching into the same pit of money, all you have to do is control that pit of money, regardless of I mean, what is it, on gold or is it on debt? Whatever, as long as people believe it.
I guess this is just one of those where you and I continuously differ in our opinion on this one. I don't know. I see the U.S. producing quite a few things here. Like I'm not sure what you mean, but we don't produce anything here. There's certainly a gross domestic output that is not limited to just dollars, and it's one of the most biggest economies that's ever existed.
Well, you
What
you say that, but to me, that, like, what are we actually shipping out in the United States?
weapons primarily?
Well,
Weapons.
maybe we do agree on that, but that is.
I mean that's our number one export. I guess the number two export would be energy, like in the form of hydrocarbons.
uh,
That's another huge one.
Well, how does that?
Entertainment.
I mean, we're shipping out weapons to countries that could be producing their own industry to suppress that production of industry, so we can turn around and ship out gas that we've extracted here in the United States, because we can't run the risk of letting the price drop for it here. I mean, this to me is part of this problem of not having governments that are set up against each other. We need to have competition, not just in the private sector, but competition at the government sector too.
But if we stay on the subject of what is the United States producing? So I mean, we've rattled off a few things. I mean, software is another huge thing that the United States produces. So, just about every major software innovation, operating system, major computing platform is produced as a result of American companies. Now, not all those devices are produced in the United States, but I think you're going to see that change pretty substantially now that there is significant automation capabilities. Like you're going to see the next wave of factories being built, and it no longer is valuable to have these factories located next to cheap labor because you can automate just about the whole factory. So that means, you want to put it somewhere where you have rule of law and that you can't easily have your intellectual property stolen. So I think you're going to start to see the United States being one of the premier places to create things like this kind of stuff, like high tech devices, chips, and whatever. I would not be surprised at all to see most of this get onshored back to the US because now we can just automate that stuff.
Well, it's interesting to see, like, that it's not the cost of labor that is driving these things back to the United States, but security. Um, lots of hand wringing with where our devices are made, in the scare about Huawei, the notion, because part of this narrative is about building chips in the United States is one about shipping, the problems we saw with the supply chain in getting things back to the United States in the wake of in the or during COVID. But the other, but I think the real reason has to do with concerns about security and the actual building of the devices. And
Well,
to
but it's interesting to see how that actually is all playing out, right? In the wake of you got these pagers and other devices that are exploding, and now there are some Muslim countries that are saying we're only going to accept completely Chinese supply chain verified types of devices. Now that is crazy interesting, and it's also one place where blockchain starts to really tie into things is trying to secure the actual manifest and supply chain tracking so that you know you're getting exactly what you had expected to get.
No, and I absolutely agree. The when I saw the reports of that it was the devices that had been compromised in Lebanon with what pagers. There was I believe it was walkie talkies also. But the fears that everybody had at the time was the batteries on our phones, and you think about it in some ways, these lithium batteries and the fires that they cause. You know, I I don't think it's a great stretch to think about more than just the information that is being leaked. It's also interesting if we think about the information being leaked that one at the at the onset of Bitcoin, I don't know how many people were aware of the Patriot Act and had accepted that the government was listening to anything that they wanted to listen to. Now we don't blink an eye, bat an eye about that. But even more so, we didn't think about or weren't thinking as much about the difference between companies and corporations listening to us also, and uh, we seem to have accepted that we have no privacy from government or corporations. So
Except to the extent that some types of communications are being sought out, which has end-to-end encryption and what have you. Like these things are still desirable. A lot of people are chasing after them. Now, whether they've been compromised or not, whether the government's mandated in a back door, we'll find out as time goes on. But apparently, there is some call and desire for these types of communication paths, and whether or not we've actually achieved that, but that's still being chased by people like Signal and some of the other carrier app.
have you seen that Telegram is backing further and further away from uh, their supposed autonomy from authorities requesting the information of what's going on in their chat groups and on their application?
I've been watching it. Yep.
Yep. And it's when we come also to what the security is. I think that the maybe the more important part of that is the verification of the identity of the person that you're talking to and the information that they're sending. And maybe eavesdropping isn't such a maybe eavesdropping or that everybody could see it is not the problem. Like maybe we do want to see that information and we just need to be confirming who is on each side so that uh, that our perception of the world is not being manipulated. So
Well, I think there's a component of that. I think that's going to be a very important thing as generative AI gets better and stronger. There's going to be a need to validate who's producing the content and whether that content was produced by who you thought it was produced by, and being able to do that easily and knowing that the only thing you can trust is stuff that's somehow digitally signed. This is the essence of what was being talked about in Software by Lowry. That's where, immutability properties of blockchains is going to solve this kind of problem. Like, that's really the only way to do it.
Yeah, the immutability is also, um, I yeah, as we also move to a world where, I don't know, like, both, it's hard to, it's hard for things to be forgotten, but on the flip side, how much that we see do we know is actually true. Um, as I think also about the change in our concepts of net neutrality, I go back, and I brought up the I don't know, the progressive era, the large corporations, and where those piggyback. There's a longer sort of tension between this argument about what globalism, corporations, government, the transnationals. I don't the transnats, in the parlance of Kim Stanley Robinson. I sometimes think, when I think about, what the world is looking like and how it's changing, we demonize corporations, but they give us things that we want. And a government listening to you, you're bound in the area that the government operates. But a company listening to you, you can pick up and go. And while it doesn't seem fair that they play games with the ad auction or what they're doing with that information, it's less threatening than what the government can be doing when they have access or knowledge about where you are. So, it just seems funny to me that there was such a big pushback to net neutrality at one time. I think it had more so to do with concerns about the government spying than I mean, I know part of the narrative then uh, was deprioritizing what your Netflix movies, because it wasn't a Comcast movie, but
I think the general argument goes something more like this. A lot of these internet service providers did not, they're not actually providing the infrastructure. Like, they didn't run the cables. They were not responsible for building the infrastructure that they're sitting atop of. They're just controlling access to that infrastructure that was built on the top of taxpayer money. And if that's the case, then it's a common good. And the ISPs really shouldn't have the ability to broker the experience of it, because in a lot of places there was not any kind of competition. But Starlink does change that. That's, I think, an interesting reason to talk about this again today. And we've kind of gone through a variety of different topics, but to bring this back to the basics of what we're saying now, there is a big fundamental difference in what's happening in the world today versus the world of 2017, 2018. And that's that we now have this ubiquitous global internet provider that is just a sky's, window away. As long as you have an unfettered access to the night sky, you can get access to a relatively unfettered internet connection, unbound by your local government, or by your nation state. And so things that maybe China wouldn't want you to see, if you have access to a Starlink, now you can do that. And that's pretty powerful. That's pretty interesting new sort of an idea, because it's no longer that you've got this infrastructure that was created by whatever government, whether it's the US government or somebody else, and the ISPs are sitting on top of it. Now you have an ISP that puts stuff into the sky, and is no longer beholden to anybody else except its own rules and what it decides should be on that network.
well, and when we think about like what part of that argument about with utilities is, I think we see going to our conversation about energy, and that's just some sort of notion of unlimited supply. There were towns, Burleson, Texas. I remember back in the late '90s wanted to provide internet as a local utility, and there was pushback. The ISPs in Texas thought that needed to be on the commercial side because they were depriving jobs from people. But it's interesting to see that the the notion of unlimited supply of traffic is I don't know. People are more open to a conversation, are open to a conversation about what they're paying for the amount of traffic that they have whenever it's in the private sector and not a utility. But that's all I've got. It's yay for Starlink. I watch it with a little trepidation. I wish that we could see more alternatives emerging, but it's interesting to see the interaction between government and Starlink, and not just Starlink, but all of Elon Musk's various companies and how they may work together.
Well, and it's also interesting that it's now being stated that because of the number of satellites that are in place, Starlink provides an alternative to GPS, which is a huge thing, because now GPS was always slightly hobbled so that you couldn't use it for targeting. There's like a secret way to access GPS that gives you way more high precision values, but the average mortal and people that have been using GPS have never had access to that in any substantive way. But now with Starlink, apparently there's a way to take the data that's coming to you from being connected with Starlink, and you can use it in a much more precise way to provide location data. So that's another thing to maybe watch out for in the coming months and years, is there being a discussion about limiting the type of data you can actually retrieve from Starlink so that it doesn't provide you high precision targeting capabilities.
Did you know when GPS was first offered to the public that it was shifted off by like 30 or 50 feet?
I didn't know it was to that extent, but I did know that I know that even to this day they don't provide you with the most accurate data they could.
Well, I think that they have. I don't know that they still engage in the shifting of the map.
I don't think it's shifted, but I think it's hobbled. Like it gives you like this, I don't know, like 5 meter range, like, which is perfectly fine for navigating around, because it just deals with it and says you're probably on the road. If it says if you're moving a certain speed, then you're probably in a car, you're probably on the road and not over in the ditch, whatever. So I think when those mapping systems are displaying your location, they consider the lock point to which you ought to be on, and that's the center of the road.
Actually, I think they do it with scrambling now. I think they invented or there was a now the military uses scrambling in the areas that they don't want GPS to be used, because so many of our devices, and especially like aviation, like now you can fly all the way down to the ground with GPS. So it'd be interesting to look in to see what's actually going on there. But it's also great to think of the GPS and these concepts of who controls the internet and who controls GPS. Well, it goes right back to the military. We all know that the internet came from DARPANET, and that they have a concern about this. But maybe for another conversation.
All right, we'll see you tomorrow.